So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. Today we have George with us to talk us through his amazing Star Wars Viz. So over to you, George.
Hey man, thank you. Pleasure to be here. Always good to chat up and find an excuse to talk. Just after TC as well, quick intro about myself. I'm a public ambassador. I've been playing with Tableau for about 5 years, maybe 6 even. Oh man, time flies. But beyond that, I really just love to biz with creative stuff. I'm super into movies, music, and I think that's why you also have this Star Wars biz on your table today.
So George, this is amazing. The first time I saw this, I think it was last year, I fell in love with this. I'm also a huge Star Wars fan, so this really speaks to me. And it's just wonderful how you went into the different episodes and how you have the lines curved through each of the planets. So maybe just talk us through how you actually came about the design and the inspiration behind it.
Hey man, thanks very much, by the way. Coming from a Star Wars fan, our parents grew up with it, we grew up with it. The younger generation's growing up with it now, and it's probably going to keep going because it's now owned by Disney. So yeah, the motivation for this comes from a genuine place like that. And I really wanted to pay homage to the cross-generational franchise. The whole thing kind of started from a conversation with my friends. We would always say how incredibly chaotic the Star Wars universe is in terms of the movie. This started with a single film called Star Wars, later renamed to A New Hope, which wasn't planned to be a franchise in the moment, but it did so well, won a few Oscars. Then it expanded into a trilogy, and several years later, you have the prequel trilogy where you're going back in time. And after that, you jump again with Disney now having the rights to George Lucasfilm. You've got the sequel trilogy, which is all the new stuff we've seen in the last 5 years or so. And then in between those films, you've got other smaller films like Rogue One and Solo. So essentially, there's no chronological order to how this thing was put out. It was jumping all over the place. And so the question that was in my mind was, what is actually the relationship between the release order and the chronological order? The first version of this viz started with the top layer, which is the order of release, and you have the bottom layer, which is the chronological release, but it was just like straight lines connecting the dots. And it wasn't supposed to be more than that. In the beginning, I was just like, I want to see what this is. You start expanding and you're asking yourself different questions. I wonder what the box office was. I wonder how many Oscars and nominations they had and how well the movies did over time. As you're doing that, you're starting to think about new layers, and it made sense to then talk about adding a third layer and then a fourth layer. So I would say that this is one of those visits where you have questions and then you adapt the design accordingly. And then, Star Wars, it's a kind of cosmological, it's a space odyssey, right? So it kind of made sense to have this backdrop with the stars and that. It's like, oh, I bet this would look cool. I really love it when visualizations have this theme to it, and the visualization is part of the design. You've done an amazing job as well with your Godzilla viz in that respect. I think it adds that wow factor. It makes people want to look at it. And if it's done well, it doesn't take away readability or usability. I think it only empowers it.
So for yours, did you do the exploration within Tableau, or were you using Figma or other Illustrator to give you an idea of wireframing and stuff?
Yeah, good question. It's very typical to start with a wireframe and say, hey, this is probably what it's going to look like, especially as business intelligence analysts in consulting. But for something like this, I really like to get my hands dirty from the beginning because I think it's just the simplest way to explore the data set. The important thing here is that if you're planning to build a visualization, which is part of the design, then the shape of the data really matters in the final look and feel of the thing. So you really need to know what the planets are going to look like, how big they're going to be, what the position has to be. And that's very hard to do in Figma.
I think that's a very cool point, because if we think about the data viz community in general, there's actually two different camps. There are people who start with the data exploration, and there'll be people on the other camp that start with the design first and then find data to fit their design. It's interesting because you see very distinct design styles for the two different camps, and there's no right and wrong. It's just how people do stuff.
Agree. I think the key here is being adaptable. So I had a very small quiz on Mount Everest, and I was like, hey, you know what? I bet that an area chart showing a metric over time can be made to look like a mountain going up. But until you get to the data and you see what it looks like, it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to make that work, and you have to be adaptable. But I have so many visualizations which are in the graveyard of visualizations on my laptop because there was something that didn't work about it.
I think that's a very real problem for the data fam. For me, I have a whole list of things in my graveyard that I want to do, but I either can't find the data for it or I don't have the time to actually do it. And I realized that there's this small little signature up at the top here. And it just happens that your name and George Koursaros. Was that kind of intentional or it was just...
Oh, man, that is brilliant. I could say that it was, but I haven't thought about it until now. But created by George. Yeah, that's actually brilliant. You know what? Yes, it was intentional. Yeah, I remember now.
Yeah, just roll with it.
Hey, you know, sometimes I'm too fidgety with things. Like, I add a lot of detail where it's not needed. And if you go for a topic that you're genuinely interested in, it does make a difference, and it does kind of motivate you to put your best work out there because you're doing it because you're genuinely loving that topic and you're going to keep at it until it looks exactly as you imagine it.
So to add on to your point, this is actually what you have done. And you were saying that you like to add embellishments here and there. You can see, like, so if we disable this, the craters go away. You have this tomato icon over here. You have the glowing effects at the back where I can just disable from here. So it's a lot of layers and a lot of design touches that you put across everything. So the data set was pretty straightforward. So it was a list of all the titles and the box office and the actors. But just walk us through a little bit on how you created the calculations, because everything was done in Tableau, which was amazing. Like, I've seen people do custom shapes like this, but they have always used a custom shape polygon that they do externally and they import the X and Y coordinates. But you actually created the X and Y coordinates based on the title IDs and spread them across like a radian.
Absolutely. So there's a few techniques going on here. One of them is trigonometry, and it really is basically plotting points along the circumference of a circle. And once you have that, you can use some transformation techniques like mirroring to flip it. This is what you have happening in the third layer, where you have basically like a smiley face and a frowny face. Then the second thing you're doing is all those curves in between. Those are sigmoid functions. And to do those, you need this densification table. So if you click on the densification one, it should show the 100 points. Those curves are made up by 100 points, and each position of those points is defined by a sigmoid function, which is plotting things not in a line, but in an S-shaped curve. It's a lot to consume in one sitting, but effectively, these are the two techniques.
Definitely. Sounds good. I think we have a lot of information for people to digest today. So thank you, George, for joining us on this short episode, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, man. See you.